Hey, New Body's back with the big one, episode 30, so another big milestone for us. I'm super excited to hit this point. Again, I've said it a few other times when we've hit sort of like milestone number episodes. I didn't even know if we'd make it past number 2, let alone number 30. So keeping going. I do apologize that the cadence that we've been coming out with these, the turnaround time has been kind of slow. I have been super busy. I guess I'm always super busy, but for some reason, even more so than normal. So apologies for that, but this is going to be a big one. It's really an important topic, and it's probably going to be longer than a lot of our other ones, so more on the 20-30 minute side than on the 2 to 6 minute side. So just a heads up, you may want to watch this one in pieces, but it's also an episode you're probably going to want to come back to a few times for some guidance. And the reason why is this is one of the foundational things that I recommend to people, and it's what I want to talk to you about today. It's called the slow carb diet. You'll also see it referred to as SCD. And it's basically not a diet in the sense of like shake for breakfast, shake for lunch, and a sensible meal, or a lot of the other sort of like short-term diets that you'll see out there, like South Beach or the Zone, or whatever. These diets that are more about like, gosh, I got to lose weight for a certain event that's happening, and then I'm going to go back to normal living, and I'll do that diet again in a year when I put on all this weight. This is a diet in the sense of the traditional definition of the word, what you eat day in, day out. Now, it's not to say you won't get some pretty extreme results from this approach. You will, you can, and you will. But this is what I think is a very livable diet that you can sustain for the long term. Now, it does have some pretty big changes for most Americans, but that's okay, because these changes aren't just about losing weight. They're about decreasing your risk of heart disease, decreasing your risk of diabetes, decreasing your risk of cancer, decreasing your risk of digestive and bowel issues. I mean, take your pick. This diet really has aspects of it, both what you keep in and what you don't have in your diet, that will benefit your body overall. So it's about looking great, it's about feeling great, but it's also about being great. It's really being healthy and fit and having the energy you never realized that you could actually have. It's amazing what your body is putting into digesting all the wrong kind of stuff. So this is about cleaning up your life. So the slow carb diet, in effect, is about the kinds of carbs that we put into our body. Now, just for background, there are 3 kinds of carbohydrates out there. And stepping back from that, there are 3 kinds of calories out there. So food is one of 3 things. It's either protein, it's a carbohydrate, or it's a fat. And the thing about the slow carb diet is protein and fat are totally fine. Actually, it's about sort of upping your protein intake. But the key to this one is you're not going to live your life in fear of fat. So actually, you should be pro-fat, and there are some tips and tricks to living a slow carb lifestyle that includes seeking out a fattier alternative, which is really interesting. I lived my life in total fear of fat and in total fear of cholesterol, and I will say I had problems with both of those things despite really trying to minimize them in my diet. I don't minimize them now, and I have no problems with either of those things. My body fat, my cholesterol levels, my blood pressure, etc. And that was a huge leap for me to get over as I looked into the slow carb diet, because I didn't see how eating this way was going to result in better numbers for those things that I had always been concerned about. So let me take you through the 3 kinds of carbohydrates. So there is fiber. That's a word that a lot of people hear, and it's very beneficial, and that is absolutely true. Fiber is a great thing for you. And fiber is typically found in whole grains, but then also in vegetables. So vegetables primarily, and a lot of fruits, but vegetables are fiber before they're anything else. Then the other 2 kinds of carbohydrates are starches and sugars. And what the slow carb diet tries to do is minimize, or ideally cut out, your intake of starch and sugar. And that's really, at a very basic level, the simple trick to living a slow carb approach or slow carb lifestyle. So I want to talk about some of those things that you should be avoiding and some of those things that you should be upping in your daily intake to have a well-rounded diet, living happily, enjoying what you eat. And I will say I've been following this approach for just about 3 years, and it's really not that hard. There's absolutely an upfront piece where you're like, oh, I can't give that up, or what happens when I go out or I go to someone's house. I've dealt with all of that, and it's actually a lot more possible and a lot easier than I think anyone gives credit to going in. It's just a question of sort of putting your concerns and your fears and your reservations and negativity aside and actually just giving a go. So there's a little rule of thumb on the slow carb diet that isn't 100% accurate, but it's a pretty good rule of thumb. It's if it's white, don't eat it. And we're talking about carbs and sugar and starch very specifically here, but that means any sort of flour-based product or wheat-based product, if it's white, or even it could be bleached. So people are like, well, whole wheat flour, whole wheat pasta, whole wheat bread, that's still out on the slow carb diet. And the reason is it's primarily a starch. Yes, it has fiber, but it's a really big delivery item for starch in our diet, and starch ultimately turns into sugar. So flour-based products like baked goods, pasta, things like that are out. So that means cereal. If you're a morning cereal kind of person, that would not work with the slow carb diet. Another typical white-based food is dairy products. So we're talking about milk, we're talking about cheese. The only kind of cheese you could eat actually is cottage cheese. And the reason for that is cottage cheese is primarily something called casein, which is one of the two proteins in cheese, in milk rather. About 80% of the protein in milk is casein, and casein is by and large the only ingredient really in cottage cheese. So it's very high in protein without much of anything else. But let me set that aside for a moment. So another white thing, potatoes. And actually here's where we have to break from the white rule a little bit. This includes sweet potatoes and yams, or purple potatoes, or yellow potatoes, or whatever color the potato might be. Potatoes are out. And the reason being they are primarily a starch. It's really upsetting for me to see how many Americans consider having a baked potato or French fries to count as a vegetable serving with their meal. And I can assure you that is not a valid vegetable. It's not that it isn't worth something energy-wise, but it doesn't carry the nutrients that you really need, and it's just loaded with a lot of things you don't. Now, sweet potatoes are much better than the typical white potato, but still really high starch and sugar content. So potatoes are out. So milk, any flour or wheat-based product, and that includes rice, that includes quinoa. I love quinoa, but quinoa would be out here too. And potatoes. And that, in a nutshell, is really what we're trying to drive out. But there are a couple other things that we need to remove from the diet to get to the worst white thing of all. And that's this stuff, which I also have here in an organic form. This is sugar, white refined sugar, and this is organic cane sugar. Neither of these is okay. And this is really the ultimate thing we're trying to get out of our diet is sugar. So anything that has added sugar to it, so think about ketchup is a very sugary item. A lot of salad dressings, especially the creamy ones, you've got like a dairy component and a direct sugar component. But anything that has sugar added to it or just naturally has a high amount of sugar, and that means fruit, which is probably the toughest thing for a lot of people to hear is, wow, I can't eat fruit on this diet, how could it be healthy? Well, think about, going back a few hundred years when people weren't flying produce or shipping it across continents, let alone countries, from different parts of the world that could grow year-round. Well, they went without fruit for months at a time, and somehow we're all here today, which means they all lived through not getting fruit, half the year or whatever it was. So you can live without fruit. I don't want you to think that it's impossible. And what we're going to talk about in the slow-carb diet is a way that you can keep fruit in your diet for a part of your week and still get those vitamins and nutrients that you might be concerned about missing out on. So no fruit. And ultimately, again, what we're really talking about is getting the starch and the sugar out of your diet, the more the better. The things you can have, I said protein, so meats, and really trying to go for the hormone-free meats, things without a lot of chemicals added to them. So if you can do organic, fantastic. If you can at least get animals that are raised without hormones, without antibiotics, that is better for you, because what you're doing is increasing your toxin load when you take those things in, and it just makes it harder for your body to get rid of all that. If you can go to the point of having grass-fed and free range, that's even better. But everyone has different budgets and different access to sources of food. So if you've got a Whole Foods or another market that you love, do they carry the things that you need or not? And can you afford them? So meat, totally fine. Err on the side of reducing the hormone and antibiotic load in your meat. And you can absolutely go vegan or vegetarian. There's nothing wrong with that, and you can totally make that work here. You also can eat fat. That's totally fine. And when I mentioned cottage cheese, you don't want the fat-free cottage cheese. You actually want a 2% or even a 4% if you have to have it. Because that fat is actually going to work in your favor here. But why are we talking about reducing sugar and being okay with fat? Well, the reason is ultimately about how your body processes that sugar. So you may have heard the word insulin. So insulin is something that your body creates. For most people, it creates it. Those who are type 1 diabetic, your body can't produce insulin. But for everyone else, including type 2 diabetics, your body creates insulin, and insulin is used in response to the sugar we get in our diet, either directly in sugar form, so things like lactose or sucrose. Sucrose is table sugar, lactose is the sugar in dairy. We take those in, or starches or other things that our body breaks down into sugars. Starch is really like the next step up from sugar. It's very easily created into a sugar within your body. And that's why we're trying to avoid starch as well as sugar. But insulin gets released in your bloodstream, and that helps your cells take the sugar in and store it as fat later. Now, the thing about insulin is kind of like if you were to tap yourself on the arm. After a few minutes, your body might start to sort of desensitize you to that feeling. And so if you want to feel the same amount of pressure and pain, you'd have to tap harder. Well, insulin works that way. So the more insulin you have in your body, the less sensitive your cells become to that insulin. So they become insulin insensitive. As a response to that, your body needs more insulin to deal with the sugar that's coming in and be able to process it, so it ups the production of insulin. As it ups the production of insulin, your cells become more resistant to that insulin, so your body has to up the production again. And it's this vicious cycle of sort of more insulin, more sugar begetting each other. And that's actually the way that type 2 diabetes works. Is it's not that your body can't make insulin like with type 1, it's that it's made so much and the cells are so desensitized, it doesn't matter how much it makes anymore. It might as well not make it, because your cells don't even know what to do with it anymore. They're so shut off to insulin because they're just constantly bombarded with it. So that's effectively what type 2 diabetes is, and that's why we see the levels of type 2 diabetes and the frequency of it skyrocketing in America. And it's really, really a dangerous thing that we actually have the power to control if we just cut back on our sugar and starch intake. So the reason why fat is good in our diet is that if your body has a food that's high in fat and has some sugar but not a ton, it's going to sort of ignore the sugar in it and not process it in the same way, and not need to store it as fat because it's getting fat in. So it's not going to hang on to that sugar. It's not going to spike the insulin as much. It's not going to create that insulin insensitivity and start that vicious cycle. So that's why I said with cottage cheese, if you have cottage cheese with some higher fat content and not the skim cottage cheese or 1% or 0, that's actually better than if you were to have the 0, the 1%, because the fat then gets the focus and not the sugar. Now, all of this stuff is about ultimately changing the way your body metabolizes, the way your body deals with sugar. So it's talking about the high insulin leading to insulin insensitivity, which leads to higher insulin, which leads to more insensitivity. We can actually work that in the other way. And the cool thing is your body can be retaught. So by reducing your sugar intake and your starch intake, and the closer you get to 0, and by sustaining that over time, and that's why I say this isn't a short-term diet to use and then go off of, it's a way to live your life. You actually change the way your body metabolizes. So your body doesn't need a lot of insulin, so it's very efficient at processing the sugar it gets. And because you're not giving it a ton of sugar, it's not going to need a lot more insulin, so it's not going to get back into that trap of insulin insensitivity. So when you do get sugar, and invariably you will get some during your day, even if you're trying not to, everything is a little bit of sugar, or not everything, but many things have a little bit of sugar, or a little bit of starch in them. And you try to avoid that, and that's great. But if you get a little bit, if your body's hyper efficient at dealing with that sugar, it's not a problem. You're not going to suddenly pack on all this weight and suddenly become diabetic, because you're living your life in a way that corrects the body chemistry and the metabolism so it can deal with the sugar that a normal, healthy person should be getting, and not the levels of sugar that most Americans get because of the way our food is processed and the fact that sugar tastes really good, and the food industry knows that the more sugar they put in, the yummier something is, the more likely someone is to buy it again. So we're going to break that cycle, and we're going to have bodies that metabolize our food in a much better way that works for our advantage. Now, here's the specifics of the diet. So you're going to avoid those sugars and starches on a regular basis, 6 days of the week. And then on the 7th day, and you can pick which day is your 7th day, we're going to do a cheat day. So 6 days a week, you're really good about it. You're not having dairy, you're not having fruit, you're not having sugary things, you're not having bread and cereal and pasta and other flour-based products. You're not eating rice, you're not having baked potatoes. One thing I didn't mention was processed soy products. So thinking about tofu, tempeh, soy milk, soy protein shakes. Anything that's not just like edamame, the actual soy bean that you can get. You can buy them frozen, you can buy them raw, cooked, whatever. That's a fantastic food, but get that in its pure form. A processed soy product would count in the white world. It is white. So you're living your life really well those 6 days. Day 7 comes around, all bets are off. And actually, it's really good for you to go a bit nuts here. Now, the way that I've done this is those 6 days while I'm living a bit strictly, and at first it's going to feel pretty strict. I kept a little piece of paper with me and a pen, and I wrote down the things that I was craving. Or, if I saw someone eating something like, oh, I want a bite of that, or there's cake at work for someone's birthday and you want a piece, you're not going to have it because you're on the right path. But you can write down piece of cake, or donut, or bagel, or spaghetti and meatballs, or bowl of cereal, or bowl of ice cream, or piece of cheesecake, or whatever. It really doesn't matter. Whatever it is you're craving, but knowing that you have the freedom to still eat that thing in a relatively short amount of time. You don't have to wait 3 months until your high school reunion's over or whatever. It's just going to be a few days. That really helps mentally in getting through. But then also, when you get to that day, you're going to go nuts. And I will say, everyone that I work with has a lot of trouble pushing themselves on that first day because they've done it. They've done 6 days really strict and like, oh, I don't want to give up the progress I've made. Most of them lose between 2 and 5 pounds in those first 6 days just because their diet was so out of whack. So they get really nervous about throwing away that progress they've made because they're looking at the whole thing as short term, because that's typically how people have dieted. Well, we're not on the short term anymore. So it's okay if we step back a little bit because we're going to push ahead right afterward. So we have that cheat day, and the first 1 or 2, you may well have to push yourself. But I bet if you push yourself, you are going to find yourself feeling miserable at the end of the day because your body's not used to this stuff anymore. You're going to be exceptionally full. You're going to be bloated. You're going to be uncomfortable. You're probably going to spend quite a bit of time in the bathroom. A lot of people do. But that's all kind of the point. So what we're doing with that is we're giving ourselves our freedom. So mentally, that's a benefit. So you can still feel like a normal person. We are giving our insulin production a chance to spike, so we're not losing the ability to produce insulin or shutting it off to such an extent that our body couldn't make it if it needs it. So we're keeping our own ability to manufacture insulin up there, which is good. And we're keeping our cells aware of what to do with the insulin that it gets, which is also good. So it's just sort of teasing them and keeping them sensitive to it without shutting down the response. But then also, you are going to dislike what you've done so much and not even want to look at half of that food for at least a few days that it's going to get you through like half of your next 6-day period. So by the time you're getting over the idea of what you went through in that cheat day and you're starting to feel like, you kind of forgot how bad it was and maybe you want a piece of cake, it's only going to be 2 or 3 days away. So you're not going to have to get through 6 days. Now that first week is the toughest because you start off with those cravings and you have to make it through the 6 days. But after that, everyone that I've worked with, and myself included, 2, 3, 4, even 5 days after the cheat day, they still don't even want to think about having, whatever it is that they had. I was definitely the same way. But then you only have a day or 2 or 3 where you've got cravings and you can't do anything about it or you shouldn't do anything about it. And then you get to your next cheat day. That's a lot easier to deal with than having the full 6 days. So make it through that first week, and then that sense of time will go much faster because you don't even want to think about the things you normally would have been craving. So we make it to another cheat day, and the process continues. You will definitely need to push yourself, again, to eat those things. And a big piece of it is having that level of freedom that it really doesn't matter and you don't feel trapped. But there's also a piece of it that's just being able to be normal out in the world. For me, I chose Sundays, and I would flex sometimes based on, if I had a Saturday event, or if I was traveling for work in a given day and I know I'd have a little bit of trickiness getting access to certain foods, or we had a big, work dinner or something during the week. You can move the day around. It's best to keep it on the same day, give or take a day. But if you do have to flex, you can. Just be mindful of that and then adjust later. So having that day of freedom lets you be normal in the world, right? So you can go to a family wedding or birthday party or whatever and not have to be the person sitting on the side eating carrot sticks while everyone else is having cake. You can partake with everyone, and it's much easier to follow the rules when you don't have that blatant of a temptation right in front of you that you can't partake in. So this way you're sort of making it through those really tough periods where everyone's sitting around eating something that you would like to be eating but couldn't otherwise. So you time your cheat day to overlap with those kind of events, and you're in a better place. You don't have to do one every 7 days. There are people who do one a month. That's pretty extreme, and there isn't necessarily any proof that that works better or works worse, but you can do it every 7 days, and I think that seems to work pretty well for people, not just physiologically, but mentally as well, and it's important to bring the two together. So what I have on this side of me are some things to help deal with it. So the first of them is, this is a brand called Truvia, but the product is stevia, and it's an alternative to sugar. There are a number of sugar alternatives out there. Probably the one that gets the most attention lately has been Splenda, which the generic name is sucralose. Before it was Equal, that's NutraSweet. Before that was Saccharin with Sweet and Low. NutraSweet, Sweet and Low, sucralose in Splenda. Those are all, they're sweeteners, and they work in the sense that they're not sugar and they make food sweeter. And some have a weird taste, some don't. But what they actually do is, in your body, they spike your insulin production, which is really interesting. So they're not actually adding sugar. So once the insulin is up, there isn't necessarily sugar for it to turn into fat. But you're still getting that insulin spike, which means your cells are still getting tapped on, which means they're still getting desensitized. And so you're sort of fueling that same insulin resistance issue, even though you're not taking in sugar. So that's not very helpful. Stevia, on the other hand, doesn't work that way. So stevia is natural, it's plant-based, it's not a chemical. It's a chemical derived from a plant, but it's not, a totally manufactured chemical. It's been around for a very long time, just not in the US. And it is very sweet. Some people don't care for the taste, maybe try a different brand. I happen to like the taste of Truvia. There's also the Skinny Girl brand has just come out with an organic stevia line that I've been using that too, and that seems really good. There's a whole number of them out there. But it's very sweet, works really well. You can cook with it, you can put it in coffee, you can put it in tea. Some people think it has an aftertaste, some don't. Could be brand dependent. But it, A, doesn't spike your insulin, and B, doesn't have sugar coming into your system that your body needs to deal with. So it's win-win, whereas the other artificial sweeteners, they only win on the side of not putting sugar in your body, but they still create that same insulin spike, which is detrimental to the bigger picture of trying to fix your metabolism and the way your body is working. So stevia is definitely a great thing to look out for. The other is, this particular product is almond meal or almond flour. It is fantastic, but what I more wanted to show you is the brand. So I'm going to get closer with this. This is Bob's Red Mill. Bob is this awesome guy who started this basically flour and grain processing company that is now, he basically gave it to his employees. They make just really good products. The quality is exceptional, but they have a ton of different kinds of flours that aren't really flours. They're not based on wheat. So there's a fava garbanzo flour that works really well for baking. Almond flour, almond meal works really well for things like breading, if you want to call it that. I mix it into my omelets in the morning, and it gives them this really rich and filling taste. It's also pretty high in protein, which you can't really say for normal flour. I have a bag of regular, this is self-rising, but essentially regular flour here. This is 3 grams of protein per quarter cup. And Bob's Red Mill almond flour has 6 grams of protein per quarter cup. The sugar difference between the two, 1 gram versus 0 in the regular flour, but it's not just about sugar, because then we look at the carbohydrates. So to get the the non-fiber carbohydrates, that's what we care about, that's sugar and starch. This has 21 grams of non-fiber carbohydrates, so 22 total minus 1 gram of fiber equals 21 grams. The Bob's Red Mill almond flour starts with 6 grams of carbs, but 3 of them are fiber. So there's only 3 grams of non-fiber carbohydrates in this product, which is fantastic, versus 21. So 1/7 the carb load in the almond flour versus the more traditional flour. Just for the sake of comparison, if we look at this bag of sugar, it only has 4 carbs in it, but all 4 of those carbs are sugar, and the serving size is 1 teaspoon rather than a quarter cup. So you can imagine you get up to a quarter cup, and flour is starting to look kind of like a quarter cup of just straight sugar, and that's not so good, is it? So Bob's Red Mill products, there's a coconut flour that's really good. This almond flour is great. I mentioned the fava garbanzo flour. He's getting a number of different, or they, not he, because the company is owned by the employees now. A number of different flours, and if you search around, there's a ton of recipes that show you how to substitute these kinds of flours for that kind of flour. I'm pointing to the sugar, this kind of flour. The other thing that I have here, I just went over in a recent podcast. These are my brand of slow carb bars. So I have the AM Mocha and AM Vanilla here with me, and these are both the vegan gluten-free options. So these are based on hemp protein. I also have them based on whey protein isolate, which is okay. So whey is a dairy protein. I mentioned casein. Whey is a dairy protein. The other dairy protein, there's casein and whey in dairy. So typically the way that whey is packaged and produced for people to use in shakes and other things like that includes a lot of the sugar with it and a lot of other products from the milk that you don't want to get. So if you get whey, it should really be whey protein isolate, which is what the non-vegan version of my bars have. But these vegan versions are hemp-based, which is totally fine. I have to say, I really like the ones made with whey, and that's what I've been eating for a couple of years. I've just come out with these hemp ones. I actually think they taste better. So I love these things. And you can buy them by the box of 12. You can buy them individually, but if you get a box of 12, it's a better deal. So there are a number of tricks and tips out there to help you live a slow carb lifestyle. One website you can go to is 4hourpeople.com. And I'll put a link to, they have this great posting that's basically the things you absolutely need to avoid and the things that you can eat when you're on a slow carb lifestyle. So we'll go to newbodies/SCD do's and don'ts. So that's a great way to figure out, can I eat this? Can I not eat that? Give you a more spelled out list of the things that you can and can't eat or need to avoid or could up your intake of to make up for what you're avoiding. It also helps you think about for cheat day, what kinds of stuff do you want to be cheating on? Because you've got that list of all the don'ts and you can see very quickly what you can eat or what you should make your priority for cheat day. I think you probably do just fine coming up with your own list, but it doesn't hurt to have some help. So that's really it. The slow carb diet is really a lifestyle that you can follow, and it's about reducing your sugar and starch. It's for the sake of changing the way your body deals with the food it gets, so it works in your favor instead of against you. Now, the really cool thing with the SCD approach is you can lose weight and stay in shape even when you're not able to work out. So I've had a couple of operations since I went on this whole journey and got in much better health and fitness. I had hernia surgery, I've had knee surgery. I feel like I had one other, but that might have been before. I had back surgery, but I think that was before I started all this. But my hernia surgery was pretty intense recovery, and I was out of commission for a couple of months. And I didn't really put on any weight, so to speak. I definitely lost some muscle mass just from atrophy, but my body fat stayed relatively the same. Same thing with my knee. I had a knee injury in October of 2012. I had surgery in December of 2012 and wasn't really active again until probably February or March. Probably February. So that's, again, another long stretch without working out with any real intensity to it. and I was really just fine. And the reason is because I wasn't eating the wrong things, so that my body was working with me and not against me. And that to me is kind of how I would describe my life before getting fit, is I always felt like I was in battle with my body for it to look the way I wanted it to, and for the numbers when I had a physical to come out in a good way and not borderline or on the wrong side of that measure of, you're safe to this point, and then I was up here in the bad zone. And so it's the first time in my life where I feel like once I adjusted after the first few weeks, it's not a ton of work. I feel better, and I'm actually working with my body instead of working against it. And I have a feeling a lot of you feel the same way, is actually you're constantly battling with your body to look and feel the way you want to. And you're constantly trying the new exercise or the new fad diet, or feeling like it's not going to work, or just basically feeling down about it and like your body's just not your ally. Well, the truth is it can be. You just need to get it aligned, and that takes changing the way we eat so that our bodies do what they're really meant to do, and that's working the right way to help us. That, in a very simple way, is how you enlighten your body.